Well, as digital fraud attempts on consumers and businesses continue to rise, cybercriminals have shifted their focus from financial services to the gaming, travel and leisure industries. A report from credit reporting company TransUnion found the overall rate of suspected online fraud attempts jumped by 16.5% globally compared with the same period in 2020. For more on this, I'm now joined by Lee Naik, TransUnion Africa CEO. Lee, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. So are cyber criminals getting smarter? What are these numbers showing?
Well, a couple of things. As we have a constrained environment in South Africa, we found that they actually are moving to softer targets. So they've moved from financial services and retail into targeting leisure, travel, and the gambling sector, which are easier targets as our consumers look for vices and outlets in a very constrained lockdown environment. The number one of all of this has actually been the gambling sector, where over a 900% increase in digital fraud attempts, Shahan, compared to the same period last year.
Yeah, let's talk about this a bit more because it's very interesting to see that digital fraud attempts in South Africa are decreasing, but online gambling industry being affected more. How is that working out? Take us through the numbers when it comes to digital fraud attempts decreasing.
So the first thing is that in the retail and financial sector in South Africa, we have quite an advanced sector that a lot of the business is done via the digital first or mobile era. A lot of these banks and retailers have spent the last 18 months tightening up their security. In that same time, the fraudsters have struggled to get online into these consumer transactions, and they've moved away to these easier targets. So I think our banks and our lenders and our retailers have taken advantage of the advances in technology to start to tighten up their own security, thereby detracting the fraudsters from these easy targets historically.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, if you can, explain how these fraudsters try to trick people who are gambling online. What should they watch out for?
So what's interesting to note, Shahan, at the outset, that every month has 1 million unique visitors to online gambling websites. So that's the first thing, right? It's an active outlet for consumers in South Africa. The easiest thing to know is that we need to be aware of our identity. Fraudsters use our identity, our address information to actually register for these gambling sites. And secondly, they get access to our credit card information, typically purchased via dark web, underground websites to register on these sites. So if you aren't aware of where your credit card details are, if you aren't aware where there's activity happening on your credit profile, then Shahan, you become targets for that. The second thing that happens is once the customers actually get registered fraudulently on these websites, fraudsters typically load up money onto a gambling website and then request a refund from this account into their own personal accounts. They divert money from a consumer's account into their own. That's probably the easiest example of how consumers are being defrauded by simple identity theft and using credit cards where the info has been stolen.
Yeah, and then let's look at the travel and leisure industries. How are they attacking these industries in particular?
Well, very similar. Even though gambling was 900% growth, travel and leisure was the 200% to 300% growth. As people look for outlets, as the COVID restrictions ease up, we're looking for ways to travel, we're looking for ways to get to a sporting destination, and in many cases what happens, fraudsters set up fake websites, fake travel agencies in many cases, to get you to put down your credit card details, actually pay for a trip that doesn't really exist. So fake agencies are a big thing in South Africa right now. And in many cases, booking a hotel, booking a destination overseas, as these destinations now become available, we aren't aware and doing the scrutiny in those checks we need to because we really want to get out of our houses. And many of these sites actually look real and look very, very clear to the consumer as compelling, valuable propositions. But behind them, that's where the scamsters lurk.
Yeah, it's so worrying, right, to think about that. Imagine actually trying to book a holiday and you get there and turns out you haven't booked anything. The one word that you use a lot is attempted fraud. So does that mean that these criminals are not always winning here?
Absolutely. So what we found in the frequent consumer surveys we do, 2 out of every 5 people, meaning 40% of consumers, are targeted for digital fraud. A third of these consumers actually become victims of fraud. So it's still a large number. Somewhere in the region of 15% of all consumers in South Africa that are online actually do become victims. And it's worth calling out, Shahan, that during the period of the COVID pandemic, 60% of all transactions are now conducted online by consumers. So 15 to 20% of consumers being defrauded is still a large amount. But I would like to think that more banks, retailers, and e-commerce players are doing a lot more to educate consumers, because trust is now the basis of how consumers will choose to do business with them.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for the insight. Appreciate it. That's the CEO at TransUnion Africa, Lee Naik.